right, well, let's get rolling. Glad to have you all here. Good to see you. Again, put your answers in the chat. I only see a couple folks have put their answer in there. But welcome to our third session. So this is our third and final kind of intro session. We have been doing this series, just kind of a backstory and just reminder of why we're doing this series. As CEDP, as we think about who we are and what we're about place. So, you know, we want to be intentional to focus on a geographic region and to consider what does wholeness, what is goodness, what is the work that needs to be done in this geographic space. So whether that's housing, whether that's roads, whether that's resident development, what are the things that we're thinking about this geographic space? And in that, what we're doing is we use a framework for asset-based community development. Andy is buying or has bought books for all of us from the people that care enough to act as just kind of the ABCD Bible, and really gives a journey and a history and an understanding of the framework. But we as CEDP felt like it's really good for us to just remind ourselves of these kind of core values and remind ourselves of the practices and the philosophy of asset-based community development. And as we're now in our part 3, Daniel and Armand will do a little bit of a recap, but we're thinking this morning about how do we transfer leadership? How do we transfer power? The goal for us as organizations is not that we are long-term the ones running the show. The goal is that we develop leaders in our neighborhoods. And so we want you to think this morning about how do you do that? This session, again, as we've done them all, they're going to be interactive. So you are going to need to get a piece of paper and a pen. You will need that. Daniel's going to walk you through an activity you're going to be doing. So you're going to have to be thinking about, how are you going to develop leaders? What is that going to, ooh, look at that. You got a little sample there. You're going to have to be thinking about how are you going to be developing leaders in your neighborhoods. If you haven't already, put it in the chat, your name, your organization, and like who invested in you, who developed you. So again, this morning, this is kind of our agenda. We'll do a little recap. We'll look at the ABCD leadership spiral, and we'll show an example that EMP put together just for us that kind of guides our vision. What are we hoping to see as an organization? What does leadership look like? What is our North Star? Each of us as organizations needs a resident leadership North Star. What are we hoping to see? And so we can begin to direct our efforts there. And then you're gonna have an activity, as I mentioned, and then we'll do a little reflection at the end of the time. So I will introduce my co-workers in this work, Armand and Daniel.
Yeah, good morning, CEDP. It's a wonderful Wednesday. Hey, Armand Quinones, Every Neighborhood Partnership. My role, humbly, is the Neighborhood Director for Neighborhood Development, which is a new theme in the last 5 years, going on 5 years, something like that. Yeah, happy to be here, y'all.
Yes, good morning, CEDP family. Daniel Dominguez with Every Neighborhood Partnership, primarily focusing on organizing work in Southwest Fresno, but also in Tower, as I'm a Tower resident as well. So we're going to do a little recap of where we've been in these last 3 sessions.
I'm trying to.
And so let's go to the next slide, Andrew.
I'm trying to get my video going.
There it is. So again, just to recap, ABCD is a little bit different than social services, right? That was a tongue-in-cheek. It's actually extremely different from social services. So just a quick glimpse here, what we see as a difference. So builds on opportunities as opposed to responds on problems. Focuses on the assets in the community. So the idea we talked about seeing the glass half full as we look out the front door into our community, right? As opposed to the deficits and the glass being half empty. Focus on the community as a whole, as opposed to individual focuses, right? The community is built upon the individuals in that community, but the focus is not solely an individual, but for the holistic approach of the community. And the goal is empowerment. Not to give a handout, but a hand up, right? We want to empower residents to become the leaders we know they have the capacity to be. Granted, every resident has a different leadership capacity. Nevertheless, they have some capacity to lead in some way when we tap into their assets, gifts, talents, abilities, dreams, and aspirations, right? And all of this, this is I think the pinnacle of all of it is it's rooted in the power of relationship. We know that if we have strong relationships, we have a greater possibility of long-term positive change in the places of which we are doing work. I know we've seen this in action in so many different ways. And so rooted in relationships, and the residents are at the core of all that we do. Next slide. We talked about asset mapping, right? And so there's a few ways to do that. The left side gives you kind of the textbook approach of the different categories, associations, institutions, the physical places, exchange. Where do people naturally exchange goods? Whether that's like, they're paying taxes for those goods, or it's at the corner, right? Buying an elote or bartering one way or another. The culture of a neighborhood, that's part of an asset of that community. And then obviously the individuals. Are we tracking and keeping track of the individuals of that neighborhood and what gifts, talents, abilities, dreams, and aspirations they have to contribute to the well-being of the community? And then the image on the right there gives us a pretty good layout of how it's all interconnected. And I love how the heart is in the middle, right? Again, I like to say the human element is at the middle of this, right? And the way they have it here, this comes out of the ABCD material, is that the gifts of the individuals is at the heart of all of this, right? So again, the residents of the community for the community are at the center of all that's revolving around that. And then we also talked about asset mapping strategically when it comes to the individuals in our community. I already touched on this a little bit. Next slide, Andrew. So we're talking about gifts, talents, abilities, dreams, and aspirations. There you go, that one right there. Gifts, talents, abilities, dreams, and aspirations, right? Are we listening, which is actually the next slide, but they tie together. So are we having conversations with people to hear, right? Strategically listen, right? To hear what their gifts, talents, abilities, dreams, and aspirations are. And are we archiving those? Are we tracking them so that we know when the right time is to activate them or to tap into them, or even to better organize within the community, right? So are we listening through learning conversations, having those strategic conversations with residents in the community to glean out or pull out that information, right? Much needed. And then the last one we touched on was community meetings, a strategic way to hear directly from the community. It could be a hot topic that's going on about a park issue or an alley issue or a lighting issue, whatever it may be. But again, another strategic way to hear from community members in the community is through community meetings. And we talked about various ways of facilitating those spaces, right? So that it's not what we know as the classic dump truck method, where I come as the expert in the room with a truckload full of information. I'm saying, wow, here you go. As we would say in Spanish, toma, like drinking out of a fire hose, and they walk away going, wait, what was that about? What do I really remember? So we talked about strategic ways you can facilitate those spaces where residents can feel like they actually have ownership of those spaces and are being empowered in those spaces, excuse me. One of those was the jigsaw method, right? We broke you all up into different groups. Everybody had a different task in regards to organizing a community meeting. One of them was a jigsaw method, where everybody's given someone of an assignment and then asked to be an expert within 5 to 10 minutes, right? So it's kind of a hot seat approach. But again, the resident in the community is able to contribute their what they glean from the information, and then their expert approach to how they would handle it. So then we're able to hear from those of the community how to problem solve as we move forward. So again, this was a fast recap of where we've been so far. And then today we're talking about the transferring of leadership, right? If we're doing community development work within the community, and we believe that at the core of that is the resident, the human factor, and the gifts of those residents, what are we doing to assure that they are becoming the leaders of these initiatives and of these programs? So I believe I'm handing it over to Germán and Andrew now.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Yeah, I think for me, I'll just to reiterate Daniel's point too as well. The ABCD, right? Asset-based community development is just a framework. It's a basis, right, for how we want to scale up our community work, neighborhood level scope of work. It's a framework that encompasses a lot of moving parts, but in reality, it's really simple, right? It's just connecting the dots. So you're basically connecting the dots from stakeholder to resident to geography, right? And everything else is just scales up, right? So the dreams, the aspirations, the shared concerns encompass what community voice is. And as agencies, organizations, our role here is how do we magnify that? How do we bring resources to that? How do we advocate them in this journey to see neighborhoods thrive and flourish? So for me, let me back up. For an ABC approach with this transferring leadership and power, in the ABCD model, it's agencies, organizations stepping from behind. So we're now releasing, making slow and soft handoffs to resident leaders for the change, the social change in their communities. So when we think about leadership, transferring power as an agency, as an organization, using ABCD model for community organizing, this is what we're referring to as shifting our role, where we're co-facilitating to coaching and letting residents and really empowering residents to be the voices in the room. EEP becomes not the decision maker, we're a resource behind the scenes. So yeah, Andrew, you want to share a little bit? All right, we'll go to the next slide. Hey, so this is a modified, and shouts out to Fresno Metro. This is an adaptation to their pinwheel of the organizing spiral. So we borrow this infographic from Fresno Metro. A wonderful job in your infographic. Kudos to you guys. So the organizing spiral is really based on the book, right? The book that Andy has copies of, that we really encourage y'all to get a copy of and read through, right? This is, as Andrew mentioned, this is the handbook, as you would, the manual, the Bible of insights of insights from community organizing experience on the ground. Mike Green, Henry Moore are great examples. They give, what's cool about this particular book, and I'm kind of plugging the book, at each a case study or some reflections, some insights from the organizer, and which is great because it's a process. So an ABCD model of organizing is not a clear-cut model. It's not a cookie-cut model of inspiring residents for change or building capacity and connecting the dots with connectors, resident connectors. It's really just a framework, and then best practices then branch out. So in this spiral, it's basically like 6 components, right? Or a couple of 8 components of this. It begins with learning conversations. Again, as we trained y'all in the last session of what does this mean to convene with residents on a one-on-one basis? It's this raising consciousness portion of the communication, right? The conversation. So this is how it's really birthed out. So co-identifying issues to see what residents want to see change happens here. At the end of the day, it comes back to learning conversations. So we start with learning conversations, and we repeat the process, but we have to come back to learning conversations. That is their basis, your anchor for everything we do moving forward. The step 2 process is that forming connecting groups. And I'll get into that a little bit later on our next slide, how we have lived that out. But that's definitely hearing residents, hearing the voice, co-identifying issues. Residents have a similar theme, and you form residents based on the theme, right? So X amount of residents, 10, 15 residents are really motivated to work on a park project. And guess what? We're going to convene with that particular group because they have a nuance to it, right? If it's a group of residents who are really motivated to act on social issues or safety issues in their neighborhood and that define geography, then we're going to want to convene with them, right? And eventually we would intersect both in all groups to form one cohesive group, and we'll find parallels and themes. And then we, as a democracy project, right, will now negotiate which projects to work on in a manner that's still inviting and also equitable. And in this process, we choose action, right? So this is that what I just mentioned right now. We just negotiate which issues to work on, and EEP. Well, Andrew, let me get to the next slide. So this is our North Star. As mentioned on the previous slide, the ABCD model, just in its genesis of itself, right? You go and how EEP has lived this out is kind of a modified version of it, right? So this is us living this out in the last 5-6 years. To date, before COVID, we had about 12 neighborhood associations. And right now they're still in the process of relaunching. But as you guys see in this infographic, we have phases, right? We have year 1, year 2, and year 3. So what we're saying, this is a 3-year project, right? If we're serious about being intentional with walking with residents to see the impact made, we're also going to invest our time, energy, resources to see this happen, right? This social experiment needs to take time, right? Some projects may happen overnight, but what we're saying is that, and true to the spirit of ABCD organizing, we're saying this is going to take a minute, right? For ABCD approach, in its book, in its model, right, in its genesis, in its nucleus, an agency or an organization hires out an organizer. Residents may invite an organizer, or an organization may take the lead. So for the sake of this particular purpose, EEP is then saying, let's organize with the residents, do the steps, right? So step 1 is getting to know your neighborhood, right? This is basically the asset mapping that Danielle was facilitating. This is all the nuance of the data analysis, who are the stakeholders, who are the residents for us to connect with, what does the defined geography look like, right? You go all through these steps, right, of asset mapping. So this is asset mapping. We're just calling it to get to know your neighborhood. And then that breeds into the next step, right, with learning conversations. Now we're having in-depth conversations with existing residents, stakeholders, connectors that have been identified. We're having these conversations and we're forming these groups, right? So when we get to step 4, develop neighborhood initiatives, this is what I was referring to in the last slide. When we say that we are now convening and we're now negotiating with project to work on, here's a process where this is a classroom for us, right? And I would say, if I'm honest, this step probably is probably in the 6-month mark, right? If we're doing organizing to a T and we're being diligent and we're being intentional, the first few steps takes a minute, right? We're being intentional to have X amount of learning conversations. We're being ambitious to say we're going to have about 10 to 20 a week, right, with different resident leaders, or we might recap and follow up. So this is a process, and then in between that process, was not mentioning these steps, right, is community meetings, small anchoring meetings to have us think about co-visioning what the neighborhood looks like. So these steps. Am I back on? Okay, cool. So these steps are not in a sense one size fit all, or it's just that this is the next step, right? And between these steps are little minor adjustments and modifications that need to happen, because organizing is not a cookie cutter model. So it's a lot of nuance to it and complexities. When you get to the step now, you're now with the goal is to have a core group, right? And step 4, you now have identified a core group. Keep in mind, in one geography, you might have 1,000 plus people, right, and residents of a. But oftentimes, association really is anchored upon 20 or low, right? These are your committees. This is a committee of residents who are motivated, committed to see the change happen. These are the decision makers of the community, right? It should reflect the demographic of the community, the culture of the community, the history of the community, right? So these are the folks who are the and these are subcommittees too as well, from a larger vision of association. So these are the folks who are now identifying the issues, and we are training them to do learning conversations as well. So what's lost in this infographic is the nuance to each step, right? And we get into the action plan, and step 6 is the bill for sustainability. So what that basically means, y'all, is we're modeling, right? EEP is going to model the organizing that needs to happen in the community. Me and Danielle are co-facilitating with residents. We are coaching them. We're more visible in the first, right? The last step, we repeat the process, we evaluate, but we're also stepping back and saying, okay, who are the resident leaders who have emerged, taking that defined leadership roles, what are some ongoing leadership development opportunities? So now we're investing even more into these residents, sharpen their skills, the organizing skills, what's lacking, how can we improve upon that? And then year two, we repeat the cycle, but now EEP is the coach, right? We're coaching them in this process. So as I mentioned earlier, we're more visible, more active. We're walking them with them in the neighborhood, having learning conversations. We're coaching them what this looks like. And then the coaching model, we're now, you did the work, right? EEP is going to y'all, and how to do that is by our resources and ongoing coaching. So now we have about 5 residents, maybe go through a cohort or just ongoing classes with them, and we're now being more intentional in our coaching with them. And then basically now here's the soft handoff to them, right? Here's the baton. Here's saying that you guys run with it. And the goal, our North Star, is a neighborhood association, right? They're now forming an association that's made up of residents who are engaged in this process, are taking a more of a leadership role. They're shaping the vision. They have necessary skill sets now to mobilize the community, and they have capacity now to lead their neighborhoods. So this is year 3, right? Year 3 in this theory of the process that we have lived out, that we've seen to come to fruition. Now, neighborhood associations, I would say this, some are more official, right? You have boards, you have directors, you have assigned roles. You go through the steps of being recognized by the city with paperwork and so forth. There's dues, there's maintenance and stuff like that. What we're saying in a real world, in our example, those typically don't happen necessarily. That might be the North Star for them. But these are unofficial groups, right? These are folks in the Vang Pao neighborhood who meet regularly and they have defined role, they have defined leadership, right? But they're not interested in becoming an official association yet, right? But it creates the framework for them to scale up if they wanted to, right? They can easily scale up to become an association or a CBO or a CDC. I'm gonna pause there to make sure y'all are hearing me because my internet's pretty unstable.
Yeah, no, it's good. I think if you have any questions, feel free y'all to unmute yourself or put it in the chat. I think as we're sharing this is just to say, as we are now going to move into an activity, to say, like, you as an organization need to begin to formalize what does the leadership transfer of power look like? Like, what is our goal? What are we trying to, like, if our work is done in terms of developing leaders, what will we have done? What will that cycle look like? And if you don't have that, you ain't gonna get there, right? Like the goal of self-sustaining yourself as an organization should not be our end. And so what does that vision look like? Would anybody have a question or something you'd love to ask Daniel or Armand? I'm good with some awkward pauses here, so. Give a couple more seconds. Anybody got a question? Ivan, go ahead and unmute yourself.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Ivan, Better Blackstone. The question that I have is, I really like these frameworks. I like this one also, our North Star work here. I think one of the things that I'm trying to figure out is how does this continue, or these 2 frameworks, how do they continue to apply in an effective way during COVID? Because I find myself just kind of exploring this route, and then and then going this route, and then going this route, and I'm wondering if maybe you guys have already trailed that, and maybe I can learn a little bit more from you.
Yeah, I can answer that. So I think one thing is that we've learned, and it was a hard lesson too as well, right? So if I could say just a little bit on the social change theory, right? It's built on this idea that social connectivity happens when residents are engaged with each other, right? So this organizing spiral and association work is an aspiration to get there. so that when crisis happens in communities, famines, earthquakes, hurricanes, California, we don't have those, right? I can say that we have earthquakes, but not necessarily it's to the magnitude that impacts our geographies, especially in the Central Valley. But like in a post-apocalyptic world, like we experienced through with COVID, it's a health crisis, and where it then separates the connect, right? It's basically the main barrier. The worst case scenario happen, right? And community organizing is now how you're going to create this connectivity with residents. This so I think for us, to answer your question, Ivan, it's a learning curve for us too as well. I think what I learned now is we have to put more of an emphasis on that relational connection with residents even more, right? So and keep in mind we bring our biases to the work. And I admire my colleague Daniel Dominguez. If you guys know him, he's an Enneagram 4. He's a relational connector, and I'm a marvel at his work, right? I'm a type A guy, right? So I'm thinking about the connection of residents, and there's a trust that's developed, but I'm also thinking about the work, like the task, right? And so for me as an organizer, I'm stepping back to say, well, maybe put more emphasis on that relational connection with Martha down the street, with Mary down the street, right? How can we make that stronger? Because when these type of scenarios happen, life scenarios happen, they have a connectivity, right? And they have leadership capacity to mobilize other residents. Then guess if a famine or a crisis happens, they can be self-sustained, right? With organizing skills to advocate for each other based on needs and like when COVID happens. To answer your question, Ivan, I think for me as an organizer, what lesson I'm taking is to really emphasize on that social connectivity more so in this next turn. And then obviously what we learned too as well is learning, adapting, right? Which is not a far-fetched idea for us as organizers. We have to adapt. That's kind of the life we live, and the spiral. We have to always adapt. This was a hard pivot, but we adapted with tech messages, social media, digital platform to continue that pulse and engagement.
Yeah, thank you, Hedma. That was good. And I think if I could add just a bit of a testimonial, I think because of those established relationships that we had, when it was a hard shift to go to online Zoom platform, the residents I was working with in Southwest Fresno, like didn't even know what Zoom was, right? They're like, what is that? Like, and so, but because there was a trusted relationship with an established trust bank, they were open and willing to engage in the training to learn how to use a digital platform. And we've actually seen growth in our groups in Southwest Fresno being on Zoom, right? So we haven't been able to go out and establish new relationships, but because we have fostered strong relationships with residents in the community, they have been able to tap into their already established relationships in the community and bring those people into the conversations. So again, revolving on building trust and relationships that really set us up for success, I think, in the midst of COVID. And we could definitely touch base on that more offline as well. Being conscious of time, we're going to keep.
And then Sabrina, we see your question too, Sabrina. We have some Q&A time at the end, so we'll get to that there.
Awesome, thank you, Andrew. Sabrina, we see you, and yes, we'll catch you at the end. My apologies. So here's where you're going to be invited to use your paper and pen. Maybe you have some color pencils handy or markers. So we're going to do what's called a fast fire, okay? And so you're going to draw on a piece of paper 4 quadrants like you see on the screen here, and you're going to answer these 4 questions. And so if you can see here, I've already done one in advance, so you can see a little bit about what it looks like. But let's talk through the questions real quick, and then we'll go to the next slide. So on the top left, you're going to write. You're not going to write. You're going to draw your answer to number 1, and you're going to draw your answer for all of these. So no words, pictures, right? How are you going to get to know your neighborhood? The second one, how are you going to be listening to your neighborhood? What type of resident group would you want to develop? How are you going to develop and transfer leadership to your resident group? So these are what you're going to respond to. So next slide, Andrew. So after you do this, it'll look something like this. And here's the one I did for you. And I added here. And I'm going to throw in a bonus here. You can add 3 words. but only 3 words. You can use those 3 words however you want. You can use, instead of drawing pictures for one of those questions, you can just put 3 words in one segment or one quadrant, okay? So you can disperse them however you want. So this is how I answered those, right? So the first question is, I'm going to focus on getting to know my neighborhood by being relational, right? So I drew 2 hands, shaking hands, right? How am I going to listen? I drew an ear. I'm going to listen really intently. Big ear, big ear, right? I want to create a resident group that's a resident group of power, right? I want them to know they have power to create change. And then I use the word there, right? Power. And the last quadrant, and we'll show the questions here in the next slide. How are you going to develop and transfer leadership to your resident group? Is I'm going to push, right? I'm going to push that teeter-totter for there to be a transfer of power. So that's me sitting on the low side. I'm going to push it up, right? So next slide. So here's the questions. And then I wrote some sub questions here to maybe help you think through this as you draw, right? What's worked, what hasn't worked. And then on the type of group you want to create. Is it an advocacy group? Is it a mother's focus group? Like there's a lot of single moms maybe in the neighborhood and you want to develop that kind of group. So these are all just examples. Number 4, I really want us to be intentional on answering those. What's a practical way you can begin to start transferring leadership in your space of influence now? What's a practical way you can do that this week, next week, right? And then how can you build it into the long-term plan of your place of influence or your organization? So it's twofold, right? What's a practical, simple way we can do that in the immediate future? And then how can we craft it into the long-term plans of our organization and our places of influence? So I know we had sketched out 10 minutes. I'm thinking we'd probably cut back maybe 8 minutes. Andrew, what do you think?
To work on it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think 5 minutes or so. I mean, 5 to 7 minutes. And then maybe when you're done, you can put it in the chat so we know. And then we're gonna move into breakouts after that. So yeah, maybe we'll all put on some music, some jams, so y'all can work on this.
All right, so it's time to get creative again. You get a bonus of 3 words. However you want to use them, feel free to use them. You got 5 minutes to draw your quadrants and draw your responses, and then we'll put you in some breakout groups to do a little bit of discussion. On your mark, get set, go. Have fun, friends.
Any questions just before we get, I'll play any tunes, any questions? I think it's all pretty self-explanatory. All right, tunes are going on.
Acredita no velho, pode falar, me Zé filho, que o velho tem força, faz seu time ganhar. O dinheiro é pro santo, pode pagar, me Zé filho, que o velho não cobra pra trabalhar.
Acredita no velho, pode falar, me Zé filho, que o velho tem força, faz seu time ganhar. O dinheiro é pro santo, pode pagar, me Zé filho, que o velho não cobra pra trabalhar.
O bode da Índia custa 7 mil reais. Me dá o dinheiro e eu mando comprar. A galinha africana custa 4 mil reais. Fica tranquilo que ela não deixa falhar.
Acredita no velho, pode falar, me Zé filho, que o velho tem força, faz seu time ganhar. O dinheiro é pro santo, pode pagar, me Zé filho, que o velho não cobra pra trabalhar.
O charuto cubano custa só 1.000 reais. Tem que ser do melhor, porque é especial. A farofa marafa tem que ser brasileira, que o santo não toma bebida estrangeira. Faz o que o velho mandou, filho. Escreve o nome do goleiro do time dele num papel, costura na boca do sapo, que ele vai ficar com fome e no jogo vai comer muito frango. jogou e não ganhou, é porque não fizeram o que o velho mandou. Se seu time jogou e não ganhou, é porque não fizeram o que o velho mandou. Acredita no velho, pode falar, miséria, que o velho tem força, faz seu time ganhar. O dinheiro é pro santo, pode pagar, miséria, que o velho não cobra pra trabalhar. Que o velho não cobra pra trabalhar. Que o velho não cobra pra trabalhar.
Okay, so this what we doing? Oh, we cooking today. All right, y'all come to my house. You can use my grill though. I got the brew. All right, they got some asada on the grill, man. Y'all better get over here, man. I'm telling you, it's going down. The sun resigns. You heard? Stars and moon become street lights. Tell the coons leave the guns behind. West side to the east side. Wanna see what it be like. It's golden hour. I'm rolling sour. Last episode of Power. I'll go to tower. Throw some meat on the grill. Some tequila to spill. All I need is a senorita who's eager to chill. At least today I'm not thinking about squeezing the steel. Giving you and your rat pack a reason to squeal. Told her let's throw a barbecue in the winter. Why? You move different when you move with a winner. The smoke from the grill sparks nostalgia. An amalgam of thoughts from childhood. Yeah. My innocence gone in the wind. This old aroma got me zoning again and again and again and again. Violin. Hey, y'all, hope you wearing your best, man. Hope you on your best behavior. Cause y'all at my house, man. You heard? Bring the wings and things. I'm making the sauce myself this time. I guarantee. Hey, yo, Louie Lou. Come get some of this, man.
Now where I'm coming from, it's only right we give the summer some. It's always hot, probably feeling like 100 some. Real funky, back at it for another run. You'll hear about us in the news, they be like #1. Pressure on my shoulder, feeling like I weigh a ton. We take it easy, nice and greasy, we just having fun. Some of the coldest you had the pleasure of witnessing. I give you goggles so you can see where we coming from. I stay moving in directions, allocating funds. Never slipping, me familia, stay on the run. It's one of them cookouts, y'all, that's for everyone. We staying up all night, y'all know hit and runs. We keep that music real, please stay out your feels. Yes, we dress to kill, I tell the set to chill. Wifey whipping the wheels, never heard it put like this. We closing the deals, Louie. Hey, yo, Fash. Hold up. You mean to tell me you made this barbecue sauce yourself? Oh, man. Well, all right. Hey, but check this out. I'm gonna go ahead and put my special recipe in this bowl of punch, you heard? Extra sugar. Yeah. Hey, yo, Pat. Why don't you come on over here, man, and break it down for these folks on that violin? Yeah. You know what I mean? Get a little something they can smooth out to, you heard? That's right. I'm gonna go ahead and lay back with the wife. I'm out.
Yeah, this is my work group.
Maybe throw a quick word because you didn't finish the drawing. It's all right, folks. This is all about having some fun as we engage in envisioning our pipeline to leadership. So we're going to go ahead and break you all out into some subgroups. We'll have some conversation about what you drew. So in these groups, we'll have you share, what your images represent. 2 groups. 2 minutes in these groups. So if you talk a lot, maybe talk a little less. If you don't talk at all, maybe talk some more. give up space for one another. Okay, so we're getting ready to go into those groups. Andrew, whenever you're ready.
So yeah, so each will have around 2 minutes and then we'll come back together. Cool. All right, here we go. And one less breakout.
Hey.
Actually.
Welcome back. Welcome back.
All right, you're gonna lose us all. We love you. It's not personal.
I'm gonna lose
We're
you all.
excited.
Everybody's leaving. Okay, bye.
Peace out.
What's the saying? Bye, Felicia. Headmine, you're back on.
I'm back on. Yeah,
Okay,
that's
go
me.
for it, brother.
Yeah. So I don't know what I missed, brother. Nah.
No, 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 you're perfect. You came back
we
right on
just got
time.
back.
Yep.
All right. So are we doing Q&A?
I'd love to hear any reflections too.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I can go. This is Eric with the West Fresno CDC. I'm not the best artist in the world, so I used imagery. So if you look at my profile picture, I have a photo of how do we engage residents, right? Like through community meetings and facilitation of conversations. The second question was, if you look at the top right box, how do we listen? We do a lot of we connect with people where they are and they're on social media. So I got a photo of like all these like social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter. And then the next question was, how do we transfer that power and I used a Venn diagram that kind of shows residents who are leading, and then there's, all connected through like this engaged model, that they represent power and influence, and that they have trust amongst each other. I couldn't find the last photo looks kind of blank, or it's like a stock photo of some sort. I couldn't think of anything relative to, because it wasn't visual, it was more of an action, right? So like, how do I see residents carrying this work forward? And really it's just through ownership. And I'll stop there.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Eric. Does anyone else have any questions or feedback on your particular quadrant?
Did anybody have maybe an aha moment in regards to the pipeline to leadership? Something you can do within these next 2 weeks to begin implementing that and or start building it into your long-term vision and plan?
This is Angie. I did have an aha moment. April Henry was in my group, and my difficulty has still been the same, where I have we don't have meeting places, building. We don't have can't go to McDonald's or a restaurant, or there's no community center. So a lot of what we're doing is more traditional walking. But our biggest, what's helped us out is the school, where they send out emails for us and they send out flyers for us. But they're not meeting in person. Everything is done virtually. And the school has started, and April reminded me or suggested, what about the crossing guards? Crossing guards know everyone. And I thought, I never in my life thought of contacting them. I thought just the principal and the vice principal, but thank you, April. I think that's a great idea.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing, Angie. That's really good. Thank you, April.
Yeah, this is Gabe from CEDP. Well, I've been reading a lot about asset-based, looking at different examples of it, and how to get around the neighborhood. Part of it is because I grew up with a lot of people here, so I already have a communication set up. Not everyone, and it's changed. It's changed a lot. So we use like some of the Zoom meetings through dealing with the park that we're doing. Of course, the social media platform, emails, and so forth. And we have had an office, but we worked out of our homes. But again, the social media, having a network of the assets, which are people with their talents, businesses. And so though it's suffered because of the COVID, we still had somewhat of a relationship there. And I had created a page on Facebook, and that has helped in taking what the people want, as far as even, for like looking for jobs, homelessness, and a lot of the issues that we kept in touch with the people. And a lot of the topics, they've been everywhere. So it was hard for us to focus, because traditionally we're workforce and economic development, but we have a park project, and found this article of how it can be economic. And then the breaking away, it hasn't happened, but I have been thinking of ways of that. And I've learned from a couple of people here, and there's no set plan, but it's also created other questions for me. And that's where I'm at with that. But I look forward to the book.
Thanks, Gabe. Anyone else feel like they want to share? We have a question. I see Henry's question. Her question was, we got to be careful with language. I'm paraphrasing April on one of the questions on what type of group do we want to see. You're correct. You're absolutely correct. It was just an example that we threw on, but you caught that, which is awesome, right? If we're getting bonus points away, you got it. Yes, but truthfully, honestly, we want to the basis for this question should have been, yes, what do the community members want to see happen, and how can organizations like Highway City play a role to help shape that vision? So we're learners in this process with you, with community. That's the posture we're communicating to community members, especially with language. It's very important, but also the theory behind it too as well. So thank you for catching that, April. And yes, I just wanted to make that just a clarifying answer to you, if that helps. But yes, thank you for the question. Anybody else have a question? We have about 2 minutes left. So I did post on the chat box, y'all, that I am going to share most of the resources that you've seen on the PowerPoint slide, and some additional resources. So community science has a great kind of a pulse analysis. So like if you're engaging residents, community members for a season, a year, whatever it is, there's a process with the community science handout where you can go back and do a kind of a quality of life survey. It's a great connection point, but it helps to do an analysis on what does community really say about us? How do you really feel about the organization's role and capacity, influence in the community? So I'll send that out. I'll send other handouts that are ABCD, community development frameworks. So which is good. It's just tools in the toolbox. Just add these to the toolbox. I'm going to post them on Slack. Feel free to use them as you need. If you have any questions on those particular handouts, feel free to reach out to me and Danielle. We can coach you how we use them, and how you can use them as well. And I would say too as well, next steps is hey, this is our last of our workshop series, but it's not the last you would get to work with us. And part of the monthly meetings that we have, that AEP plays a small role in giving updates. We're available for ongoing coaching. So if you need any assistance, help with your game plan, your strategy, or if you're stuck, right? When you're stuck, that happens a lot with organizing. We're available to help get you unstuck, or think about this and think about that. Not that we have all the answers, but we can help be a thought partner in this journey with you. So feel free to reach out to us at any time. It doesn't have to be resident engagement, right? So I know like Gabe's a good example. He's doing a hybrid version of this with connecting with residents and business owners, right? So his development component's a little different and different nuance than say a geography association that's only dealing with residents, right? So That's not to say it's not in at all. I mean, you want to scale up and partner with business owners too as well. So just want to throw it out there. We're available for ongoing coaching, consulting. Don't be shy to hit us up.
Yeah, and then we're also going to be, you know, Ivan, as he's come on at Metro, is going to be doing when we do our monthly meetings, he'll be doing a kind of monthly update of Better Blackstone resident engagement. So this process, we get to watch as Ivan intentionally engages the Better Blackstone corridor and those resident groups. So he'll be giving kind of an update of some of the work. And then I welcome you all to just share things you have done over this last month at each of those monthly meetings to engage residents. Like what wins have you had? What challenges have you had? All that kind of stuff. So great to be with you all. And we'll wrap up here just to get you on to your next thing. So see you, everybody.
Bye, y'all.